Guys, you don't understand how excited I am about this video. I've spent literal hours thinking about how to present one of these arguments in about 3 minutes. So we're gonna see if we can even figure that out, but it's gonna be a good time regardless, all right? So we have 3 more arguments for God's existence today. My name is Jacob Hubbard, and this is Freedom, Chapter 22, brought to you by Incarnate Ministries, based out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Pilot Point, Texas. Thank you guys so much for joining us today and just every single day so far. We're doing this mini-series again on arguments for the existence of God, and then bringing out attributes of Him, understanding what evil is, and then seeing how God's law sets us free. And so this is video 3 of that, of 6 in total. And this is the last video for arguments for the existence of God. And we have 3 to cover today, and they're different from the ones that we covered before. And the first one is the argument from beauty. The second is the argument from ontology, the ontological argument. And then the third one is the argument, and this is the one that I spent very long thinking about how to articulate it, on being in essence. So from St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophical and revolutionary essay, De Ente et Essentia, which is incredible. Anyways, so the first argument is the argument from beauty, and it's pretty simple. It goes like this. There is beauty in the world. We see beauty, right? Like when we go up to a mountaintop and we feel the breathtaking beauty of that, we're filled with awe at the sight of the mountains, of the seas, of beautiful things in nature. Like there's so much beauty in the world. But beauty itself does not have a cause that explains it in any sort of natural way. And so there's a supernatural cause for it, and that's union with God, is how we kind of think. Like some people will say, well, beauty is just like, we've developed that sense because we need to be attracted to our mates, right? For like biological reproduction. But that doesn't make any sense because like, why would I feel beauty then when I go up and see a mountain? Like there's nothing about a mountain that like attracts me in that sort of way. It's a completely different kind of beauty. And so the very existence of this kind of very deep and beauty, this very deep beauty that's even, I would say, wonder, that's a good word for it, leads us to contemplation of God and leads us into a relationship with Him. And that's a really, really good argument for God's existence. The second argument is a really fun one. It's called the ontological argument. And that means the argument from being. It's completely different than all the other arguments that we've presented thus far because it actually doesn't begin with the world. It begins with a definition instead. It's St. Anselm's argument. It's very famous. And he defines, and I've mentioned this before, God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, right? And so what he does is he uses it in dialogue, especially with like non-believers and atheists. They'll be like, I don't believe God exists. And he'll be like, I don't believe your God exists either, because you clearly don't have a good notion of who God is, because if you really understood who God was, then you would see that he exists. And he demonstrates it by saying this. God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived, right? So if we agree to that, then he says, being in actuality is better than being conceptually. So what do I mean by that? I mean, imagine your favorite meal, right? So like my favorite meal is my dad's smoked ribs. He smokes them for like 8 hours and he makes a homemade barbecue sauce. Dad, if you're watching this, you know what to do. Smoke me some ribs, all right? So, and it would be so much better. Like I can imagine myself biting into those right now and it would be so much better if those existed in actuality and not just in my mind, right? Like, it would be so much better, Dad, if I had a heaping plate of ribs right in front of me right now, rather than just a concept of it in my mind. And it's the same with God, right? It's a better perfection. It's more perfect for something to exist not in the mind, but in actuality. So by God's very definition as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, he must exist because it's better to exist in actuality than just in our mind. And when we define him as that than which nothing greater can be conceived, he exists already conceptually, like in our minds, right? Like we have a concept of him then, but he's so much greater than even that concept is, always, right? Like he's always greater than what we can understand him to be. And in that greatness, he does actually exist. So it's a different argument than the other ones, but it's a really powerful one and a good, I think, evangelical tool. So the last of the 3 arguments is the most philosophically dense, but it's really, really rich. And so I think that we should dive into it, even if we don't get a full grasp of it. So before we begin, we need to understand a distinction, and that distinction is being and essence. And so simply, essence is what a thing is, and being is that a thing is. And we're going to try to distinguish between those two things through 2 examples. The first one being a unicorn. So we can imagine a unicorn in our minds, right? Like we have a concept of what it is, but it does not actually exist. And so there we see the distinction between being and essence, right? We have a concept, but that concept doesn't actually exist. And so that's one way, and that's kind of a classical way to show the distinction. But I think a better way is just to realize that everything is different. I'm different from this couch, which is different from the Bible, which is different from the camera, which is different from the crosses. And we're not different in our being. All of us are, right? Like being, it's not something that makes something different from something else, right? Everything is, and that's actually like a unifying principle. Like everything is the same insofar as it exists. What distinguishes me from everything else is my essence as a human being. And my essence is different than the essence of a couch. And so it's the essence that distinguishes the beings, which otherwise would pretty much be all the same. And so an example I like to use for this is like imagine just like a huge sheet of red Play-Doh, just like extending out as far as you can see. That's being. It's all the same. And what essence does is it takes that Play-Doh and it forms it into different things, little couches, little chairs, little people, right? And it's like everything is distinct insofar as an essence is applied to it that distinguishes it from the being. And for those who are philosophically inclined, I do want to make a note here. I'm not unificating being and essence with matter and form. There's still a distinction there, but I just want to kind of use this as a good analogy because they are analogous, they are analogical. So basically, we are divided in our being and in our essence. And we need a principle that unifies us at all moments in order for us to exist. It's like, the analogy I like to use again is like oil and vinegar, right? Like those things, they naturally are separate until they're stirred together and then it makes a vinaigrette, right? And so like we are the combination of being and essence, but naturally those two things, they don't stick together. They're divided, they're separate concepts. So at every single moment, we're actually unified by something whose essence is to be. A God who is who he is, right? That's actually where St. Thomas Aquinas got the inspiration for this, is in Exodus, right? I am who I am. His essence is to be. And so at every single moment, he sustains us and he unifies the division within us in our being and in our essence. God's simple love, it isn't just philosophical, it's actually theological, this truth. It dissolves every division within us. So long as we are surrendered to him, any sin, any duplicity, any division, any fear, any lie that divides us, we surrender it to his simple and powerful and transformative love, and then it dissolves in his mercy and becomes one. So those are all the arguments that we're going to cover for God's existence. Hopefully at least one of them was really moving for you. Hopefully a lot of them, but at least one, because all we actually need is one in order for the rest of the steps to take place. So today's challenge, it's again to reflect on these arguments and to chew on them and thank the Lord for the power of his goodness which dissolves any division. And then also, bonus, if you guys would drop in the chat here, like comment on this video, which argument has been the most convincing of all of these that you've heard. Thank you guys. Stay tuned for our next video in this series. Have a great day.